municipal policy or other policies to the global policies to which usually member states and almost all countries are members of United Nations signed and taking part in collectively developing this agenda. So let me move on. Yes, here what we are talking about of Global Agenda 2030. It is official UN document approved by all the countries, and quite almost all United Nations is working on this agenda. It's breakdown into 17 goals called Sustainable Development Goals. They had different names in the past, Millennium Development Goals and so on. So this is not new, but periodically agenda is renewed. So we see here 17 goals. All goals has targets, indicators, and some descriptions which might be relevant or not relevant to a particular situation or a particular locality. And also UN agencies are responsible for certain goals. For example, World Bank is responsible for poverty, goal number 1, and United Nations Human Settlements Program is responsible for goal 11. That's called leading agency, which means they are responsible for collecting information and development agenda for this particular goal. And they produce guidelines and materials and so on. So the work of United Nations is usually summarized in thematical reports. There are, of course, conventions and agreements, and this is more legal documents, but they still are usually voluntary, whether you can implement certain points or not to implement, ratify or not ratify. That is not a knowledge base. Knowledge base is usually published in this kind of thematic reports, which are produced by consultants, by scientists, professionals. You know, IPCC report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, got Nobel Prize, and that was a collective work of more than 1,000 scientists. So each of those 1,000 scientists could say that they have contributed to Nobel Prize, and in a way it's their Nobel Prize. So these thematic reports can be used actually on the ground as statistics, as a summary, as some methodological guidelines, and by different categories of professionals, by researchers, by urban managers, mayors. There are many forums of mayors, governance, and so on, sustainability at a local level. So all these things represent the knowledge base. So here are just several. If we are talking about urbanization, this is UN Habitat, and this is a flagship report, the value of sustainable urbanization. And of course, there is new urban agenda, which is a legal document, but now there are some materials to help to understand it, to illustrate it. And here is depicted a book, illustrated book on main principles for sustainable urbanization. And then, of course, a bit bigger agency, it's UN Environment, or former United Nations Environmental Program, which publishes geo reports, and now we have Geo 6 And it's quite sizable report. It's, I think, 800 pages, and then there are specific streams for use, for ecosystems, for business, for cleaner production, and so on. So this is a large knowledge base. And if we are talking about, this is all global, because in each of this report, you can find what is happening on planet Earth in a certain thematical area. Then we have 17 goals, which are which supposed to be reported locally. And the first tier of this reports is national level. And so with this framework, there are again voluntary national reviews, which is a traditional document usually prepared by a national statistical agency. And a summary of statistics, which is collected from all the countries, is published in the report on sustainable development. And you can see here we have 2019 report, which is basically a statistical summary. So I would say that thematical reports have more knowledge and more flexibility in interpretation of the agenda. So this synthesis report is more formal and more reflects the state of the art of Earth development in terms of sustainable development. The thematical reports are more in-depth documents, which I would argue can be used for specific tailored purposes. I think that a general report can be used more for statistical purposes. I don't think you can find much of direction there, except what has been already approved for Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals. It is also important to understand that these reports are published by different agencies, and agencies have a little bit different agenda. So I think that it's like a menu in the restaurant. You can basically choose which things are specifically tailored to certain problems and local needs. So as I mentioned, voluntary national review, this is an example for the Russian Federation, usually prepared by National Statistical Agency. And implementation of sustainable development at a national level is a responsibility for national governments, and some governments choose to act to have a blueprint of sustainable development goals. And this quite often happening in a very developing countries where the governments don't have much resources, so they rely on United Nations, on external consultants to basically provide them with their policy. For example, I myself was working in Uzbekistan on a number of projects where they asked consultants and international community to guide them and to help them with certain issues. In my case, it was urbanization and urban development, master planning, to which they do not have a local capacity. And this is stemming from the Soviet past that is in a way quite natural, that in Soviet Union this was outsourced to Moscow, where the design institutes were located. So and in Africa is even more pressing situation with local knowledge and local capacity. So capacity building is one of the keystones of the work of United Nations, and not only distributing food or shelter or something like humanitarian aid, but mostly providing governments with a tool for national policies. Rich countries and developed countries usually pursue different strategies where they are quite strong and pioneering in many issues. They develop their agendas themselves, but nonetheless, it is very appropriate and beneficial, and indeed they all do this. Well, maybe United States, it's a little bit too big, but especially Nordic countries would like strongly to align their policies with United Nations development agenda and sustainable development goals. Interestingly, countries like Norway. So Norway is one of the richest countries in the world. Of course, they do not have any poverty or hunger. But nonetheless, many municipalities choose to check how their actions are aligned with 17 development goals, and the mechanisms for this I will describe in detail a little bit further on. So this is national review. So now we are moving to voluntary local review, which is a bit new. So it was sustainable development. It all stems from the 70s and 80s of the past century, and voluntary local review is relatively new. It's just a little bit more than 5 years, and the first report was 2018. So it's basically just a few years of implementation, this new tool. And it is very popular. So many events are happening. United Nations do not have any exclusive rights for this. People can produce voluntary local reviews, can work on sustainability agendas, can have their own events, associations, and so on. But the spirit of this, localization. By localization, we mean not national level, but subnational level. So that would be regional, city level, and municipal level. So drive to align local problems with global ones in a way bypassing national governments, I think is a modern trend, and you know that Arnold Schwarzenegger in California, for example, was pioneering in implementing climate agenda where the US government was not implementing it at all. So this is maybe a little bit of extreme example, but even if the policy is in synergy and coordinated, still local governments sometimes they see work of United Nations specific agencies more relevant to their needs than in a way the tools that the national government provides. And we also need to understand that national governments are a little bit heavy mechanisms. So if you would like to achieve some tailored solution, you can work at a local level, and it seems like this is quite popular now. So what's formally a review address? So this is reporting and visions and options. And I would say in national review, it's more on reporting to showcase where country is. The term is distance. What is the distance towards achieving sustainable development goals, certain goals. And then at national level, it's more of a vision and local agendas. And in this way, stakeholders are very important, as well as alignment to best practices. So we have quite new guidelines on all this, and as I tell that many would like to jump onto this agenda. Here we have some special professional associations, for example, United Cities and local governments. We have a UN body officially responsible for sustainable development and publishing national report. Not publishing, but arranging them. The countries publish and then present to UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. They produce draft guidelines on voluntary local review. European Union has its guidelines. You can see it's the third cover, SDG voluntary local reviews with European flag. What it's interesting, they choose to be even more localized, so they have 17 goals and then indicators and targets, but then in their methodological guidelines they choose to drop some indicators and they introduce new ones. Because usually what we do, we have a list of 200 plus indicators and say, okay, hunger, this is not relevant. For example, to Russia's share of girls in preschool is not relevant because boys and girls are going to school irrespective of their gender, which is not the case. I mean, you've heard news in Afghanistan is quite different situation. So usually local governments pick and choose which indicators are more interesting to them. But as you see, European Union went a little bit further, nonetheless appreciating and would like to use this framework of United Nations. However, they are not obliged to. They can develop their own sustainability and so on agenda, but nonetheless, they would like to be aligned globally. And so they have this SDG framework with additions, with European additions. And specialized things for territorialization of sustainable development goals that was produced by UN Habitat. And another interesting ramification is this OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation, a club of rich countries. They also embarked on this agenda, but they developing their own tool, which is called a territorial approach to sustainable development goals. You can see it is the fourth, the large cover. They have a little bit different methodology. And they are expanding, and this tool is again quite popular now. One might ask, why actually do we need all this? Because imagine you are a mayor of a small town and you have your daily routine, like you are buying buses, you are issuing contracts, you are making, you authorize certain land use, certain construction, and so on. Why would you want to produce something like this, like report, voluntary local review, to have several people in your administration working for this? Or indeed you want maybe to pay consultants 1 million to do this. Why would you want it? It actually occurs that local governments want it. First of all, this is visibility, because they would like to be known in the world. And this is actually concerns a lot of small and medium-sized cities. For example, everyone knows London, Moscow, and so on, but there are cities in Brazil, in China, which has several million people, and we do not know their names at all. But they want to showcase that they have industry, culture, and so on, and this is a good tool to promote it on a global level. So this is the first one. The second one is internal capacity building, because city administration might not have this global vision up to date. And this is a very good case, like vocational for the training, a good exercise to see is the daily routine going hand in hand, for example, with climate change adaptation, with gender equality. And we know that people, places and cities who are comfortable for the citizens, where citizens enjoy living, attract jobs, investments, and basically prosper. So this is important to make citizens comfortable. And the easy way is to take 17 goals, to take target and indicators, make voluntary local review, see what is wrong in your city, and make policy amendments. So about 30 cities produce this, and some cities are really keen to do this, like Bonn, a former capital of Germany, a quite small town, but they actually embarked on sustainability agenda from 2009 in their strategic urban documents. They already have this mentioning of sustainable development and how they do. And so this year they produced not one voluntary local reviews, but actually two, using first UN methodology, UN DESA methodology. It's called voluntary local reviews, and then they have a separate document called Territorialization of Sustainable Development Goals, produced by OECD methodology. So you see here pictures representing goals in different colors, and inside usually documents choose to be focused on several goals specifically needed for the city. For example, Bonn focused on air quality, and Los Angeles focused on gender equality. So usually it is, you select like 5, 6, 7 goals and you focus on them, and some goals can be dropped. It's also, please do not be misled that rich countries are, or rich cities are caring about climate change, and poor cities are caring about hunger. Not necessarily. Bristol, for example, focused on poverty. We see that, you know, perhaps not, UK is one of the richest countries. Nevertheless, and why they are doing this and what are the things inside, we will talk a little bit later, talk very soon. So I was privileged to work with UN Habitat on a project in Moscow for sustainable development goals, and here you can see a map of Moscow where we depicted it in sustainable development goals. The report is completed but has not been published yet. I think I am not going to go into detail. I would rather prefer to leave it for questions, because I don't know how specific context is relevant to the audience, and what would you like to be focused on? Is it poverty, hunger, innovation, democracy, environment? So I think that we leave it for questions. I will focus rather on methodological parts at the moment. So here is just a very, very brief overview of what we are actually talking about in terms of urban environment, because I'm an environmental scientist and I really do not know much about economics or social sphere, so I would not be detailing this. Although I was a lead consultant on several projects, but usually you have several experts. So, well, I always see things in general, so I focus on environmental science and land use, where the other experts usually focus on other things like economics and social sphere. So here we are talking a little bit of overlapping of correlation of different agendas. So on the one hand, we have sustainable development goals. On the other hand, we have urban sustainability via smart cities, resilient cities, nature-based solutions. Arupa is a quite famous environmental consultancy, engineering consultancy, who is also helping cities to develop their solutions and plans to improve their cities in a sustainable way. So depicted this as a synergy of many issues which you would need to consider while taking a routine planning decisions in a city. So you can see here is the economy, healthcare. Actually, healthcare was quite big agenda for United Nations due to COVID, and we were working as well and addressing COVID, not in terms of medical treatment, but in terms of how it is changing society and urbanization. So you know that several countries in Europe took this opportunity to make a different layout of the streets. For example, Paris, they closed several streets for traffic, and they, while pandemic and low traffic, they change the layout to provide more room for bicycles, and some streets they made exclusively for bicycles. Although this didn't happen actually in Russia or Moscow at all. So some cities were doing some, took this pandemic chance to change the energy mix. Some cities were actually combating waste, and COVID waste is a big issue. Not only this face masks, but also when people do not eat in the restaurants, it turns out that they take the food out in some kind of containers, and almost all the cities during pandemic saw increase in the municipal solid waste volumes, increase in the traffic, I mean motorized cars, and some fall in public transport use. So this all actually brings a lot of questions on sustainability and how do we proceed. So that is a complex mix where something here we see that already like more or less fixed, for example, reducing flood damage. So we know this for planning that we need to have more room for the water, more wetlands, to have more or less surface runoff for providing sustainable water use. But then COVID, it jumps like urgent agenda. But surprisingly, this kind of agenda sometimes have equal value in planning decision. So that's why also putting your development into international perspective. And this tools like voluntary local review, which would allow your local needs to have a global alignment, actually provide you with up-to-date, speedy information in how you can make your master plan, your routine planning decisions sustainable now. And I think it's very much dynamic situation on one hand. On the other hand, I have these pictures on nature-based solutions from Dutch canals, which are almost 15 years old, and they are still new, and they are still actually actual for Netherlands as well for many countries in the world. So these nature-based solutions have not yet been fully implemented. My personal research is on urban underground space, and what you see on the picture on the left is a beautiful lake, but indeed it's not a lake, it's a roof of a tunnel. And this is something what we want to do. We want to have sustainable infrastructure solutions creating comfortable urban environment. It is of course cost money and not implementable in all countries all over the world. That's why it's good to check it, and we have a methodology of sustainable development goals and valuatory local review for testing and picking and choosing urban sustainability solutions which would make the biggest advance in the goals, tailor it to your specific local needs. So this is from World Cities Report 2020. I think it's not exclusive. Maybe some European reports. I do not mean scholarly articles, but already policy reports where the scientific knowledge made it into policy are a little bit more advanced on nature-based solutions. But still, officially, UN picked several things which they think are mostly implementable and mostly needed to globally for sustainable urbanizations and greening the cities. So it's mentioned organic farming, creating wild meadows and lawns, natural forestry, wetlands, and soil fixation, so reducing surface runoff. This is basically urban land use and where we need to go in terms of environmental side of a sustainable urbanization, which is actually, in a way, it's quite different from this picture where you see so sustainable development goals. They have concrete indicators. They do not have anything on runoff or anything on forestry. Rather, they would have something on policy where it says that a number of nations or a number of localities implementing certain protocols for example, ecosystem services or biodiversity conservation. So these are quite different interpretation of things in terms of how you write it up and how you read it, but the same spirit, so the same agenda. And if we are talking about urbanization, here is a methodology how you can use just one goal and have a goal of focus, because if you are an urban planner, you do not focus on poverty, so you focus on urban planning, and then you address poverty among energy efficiency, water use, and so on. So this is methodology how you can do it, taking your core speciality, align it to a certain goal, and then to have a connections with all other goals. And here you see that all goals are interrelated to each other, which is I think not very much visible at a national review, because here you see you have, okay, how many people are below national poverty line, what is the percent, how many people are getting higher or secondary education break by gender and ethnicity in certain cases. So this is national reporting where you cannot see these interconnections. But at the local level, when you do planning, it's very useful to see interconnections and how your goals which you decide to focus on, for example, flooding is important in certain locations. So you need to reduce flooding risks, relocate people, to change land use, and so on. So how that would affect biodiversity, how that would affect poverty. Because maybe you have certain number of people with certain incomes who live in different localities or in different types of buildings. So if you implement, for example, climate change adaptations. So would it be equal across gender, income, disability, or would certain groups be more vulnerable? So would you need more attention to this? This is actually the core spirit of United Nations, a slogan which is called "No one is left behind." And I'm going back a little bit towards Bristol, why they choose in UK to address poverty. That is because we have a spirit of the goal. Of course, rich countries, they fall above the line. So we do not live on $1 a day or something like that. But then there is still national poverty line. And this national poverty line can be different for different group of people, including people with disabilities, vulnerable people, people receiving social care, who are maybe they do not work at all, so they rely on the states, on benefits, on governmental payments for their income. And so are these people not left behind? And in terms, it looks that in Bristol and in other places, certain people have been actually left behind because they were living in certain locations. They for example, take environmental justice. If you have noise pollution, if you have houses located very close to noisy streets, or air pollution, actually. Boris Johnson, while he was mayor of London, he actually was commissioning cleaning tracts to go quite often through the streets and to moisture the streets, to clean the streets. The only problem was that the journalists discovered that those streets were exactly where the monitoring stations for particular matter were situated, and not the other streets. So the distribution of this cleaning and basically improving urban environment or environmental safety was territorially unequal. And then another question is whether it's a rich or poor communities, then maybe it is unequal along with social lines. And I think in Russia, in the UK, there are not much problems with ethnicity, but there are in certain countries that the problems with different types of population. So all these questions are addressed within voluntary local reviews. Usually they are not addressed within national review because nationally it's too big. So we have just a number of population attending schools. And this is almost 100%. So that's fine. That's it. We forget about it. But when we go to a local level, we actually see that, and we studied it very deeply in Moscow, that Moscow is not bad. It's advanced also from Russian normative base. They have certain indicators and building standards, in fact, that so how many meters from your residence your school might be located. So it's half kilometer actually, the standard is. But I would imagine that in some places there are few localities where school is too far and school bus maybe is not reliable or something like that. And so children might be might be facing problems with getting the education. Although at a national level, it's 99.9%. If we go to locality, we see, okay, here the problem is resulted from land use, from whatever planning with education. And this is how voluntary local reviews work. So we take a spirit of the goal, education for all, and we see what are the local problems which might be which we might want to address. And specialization of UN Habitat, for example, is territorialization. So we are saying not, how many percents are attending schools, but we are saying where are those schools and where there are children which do not go to school. So what is the community of this 10 people in maybe Russian case, or maybe 500,000 people in certain places in Africa, where they do not have an opportunity because of there is no bridge, or they have some conflict prevents them from doing this. Or in fact, in some cases, actually they have a oil pipeline which they cannot cross. That's another illustration from environmental sphere in the Russian Arctic. So key things are take spirit of the goal. 17 goals. Do not pay much attention to the indicators which are not relevant for you. Then localize them and territorialize them. See how the progress of goals is distributed in a time frame, in a breakthrough as much as possible for gender, income, location, and then do synthesis highlighting your specific problems. So this is on this slide we have a little bit more details, the methodological details, how we did sustainability and urban environment via voluntary local review. So I just name the working streams, so that is important that it is a participatory process, so you involve business, government, society, and so on. So several consultants should be working on this. Then you need to review the normative base, national and local, including statistics, including the decrease by city mayors and so on. Then you need to identify what are vulnerabilities, vulnerable locations, groups, or so on, your specific context. Then you need to collect data from different sources. And then you need to do basically your research, even though it's not scientific research, but then you need to put things together while you are analyzing this. So my methodology is this, but you can choose any other. So we have several boxes or working streams through which we addressed every issue. So this is how business works, what corporations are doing, what are their policies. We reviewed their reports, and for example, I'm from St. Petersburg. I think for Gazprom, a Russian energy giant, is moving to St. Petersburg, and suddenly we have a lot of tax money. So this kind of businesses are important for cities, and it is important to see what is their sustainability agenda, even if they don't have gas here, but they have many offices. What is environmental management in their offices and so on. For monocities, as we call them in Russia, cities where they are usually located in less populated area in Siberia or Arctic, cities where they have one big factory doing something, usually something bad, like Norilsk nickel. So they have a lot of environmental impacts, yeah. But of course, a lot of money, and they produce. They process raw materials, yeah. So a corporation like this, their sustainability, or as we call now on YouTube again, environmental and social governance, how they address the environmental and social governance in the documents, is even more important for a city where they are located than city itself, because the corporation has much more money than a small town where it is sitting, where the factory is sitting. So business box is important for local review, even though officially urban planning is in the hands of urban city administration, of course. Nonetheless, business can play much bigger, much more significant role in certain locations. Not London, for example, where are many banks and you see one policy, another policy, so that doesn't make sense to single out one or two businesses. However, if we are talking about environmental and social governance, usually certain types of industries, leaders in this type, they have their common standards. They have something which is accepted in banking, for example, or in IT sphere or something. And with this, usually these cluster companies, they have more or less the same approaches to sustainability, and it would be good to know them for voluntary local review. If, for example, you are Silicon Valley and many ITs there, so it's good to know what is where do those IT companies are standing on e-waste, for example. So it would be not right to do voluntary local review without this information. Then governmental policy, it's obvious, vulnerable groups. What we did it in practice, we saw civil society groups, disabled people, single parents, and so on, and we'll be asking them, okay, so here are the goals. What are the problems? What is your problem? So this is okay, where we leave no one behind. So we give people voice to say what is important for them, in order that we do not miss something in the local review. So UN policy, which might be different for different regions, maybe some particularities. For example, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe has guidelines on emergency housing, on social housing, and they are quite good with it. So again, in the Russian context and Moscow context, you would need to read this document and address this, which might be not relevant to other maybe warmer countries, or maybe countries where these problems were not studied in that depth. Because while making review, you of course need to address problems, but you address it on the basis of documents. So if there is a big problem but not enough information on that, okay, you state it, yeah, in your review. That's easy. But then if there is a lot of documents, you need to review all of them and to make also sense of them. So it's sometimes the work for voluntary local review doesn't correspond the magnitude of the problems which you write in the review. And for that, UN policy documents would be very helpful. Available data, if not available, you need to find proxy indicators to substitute somehow. Then maps and graphs, and how you territorialize all this and put this in space. Also, you can work with mobile phones data. So if you have money, you can do many interesting things and even order tailored surveys. Diagrams is more for policymakers, but at this stage of preparation, it would be good to see if you can produce any, because if you cannot, maybe no one will read your voluntary local review. Urban theory is very interesting. So where does this all leave you in the theory of urbanization? It's very interesting to address this. And then international comparisons, tailored, of course, very important. And then work with stakeholders. In fact, we have two separate consultants working with this because it's quite a sizable work, and you need to treat everyone with due respects, send official letters and so on for your review to be truly inclusive and comprehensive. So this is a lot of work, but then document is nice. You can put it online on Agenda 2030 website and showcase your municipality, city, region to the world. So this is not an official UN methodology. This is my methodology I have developed for several reviews. And I think, I hope our point will be available. So I think I'm not going into details because details would be really needed if you are a consultant or if you choose to do review yourself. So that's, I think, would be something for perspectives for a knowledge which you can deep in if you will need it. I guess that some people can read Russian here, some people cannot. In this case, I apologize that this slide is in Russian, but this is very tailored for Moscow. What are the conclusions we came from this institutional point? And I can see, so this is, we have institutional structure, data analysis, how all goals are depicted, monitoring and follow-up. And this is some, again, methodological conclusions which we came up to, and this is published, so you can dig again deep into this if you want. And these are the directly relevant publications to this today's lecture, and these are a wider overview of the project and publications on which this urban sustainability agenda via voluntary local review draws in. So with that, I thank you for your attention, and I hope, I mean, I am available for questions. I don't know if it is allowed and what is the format here, but I would be available anyway. And if you want something specific, some publications, some specific questions, I don't know what, so email is here. Please do not hesitate, and you are very welcome. With this, I allow myself to stop sharing the screen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for your very insightful talk. Well, we have a limited audience today, so I suggest that if you have questions, you just raise your hand and ask a question. In case if you like feeling shy or not sure about the English, you also can type it in the chat, and I will read your question. So please.
I suggest I get a glass of water. We have please. 1 minute break, and perhaps people can think about questions during this minute.
Yeah, please get your glass, and please do think about your questions. So please, Nikolai is back. Please do come up with your questions. So I think we do not have questions right now. Please raise your hand or do something if you still feel like you want to ask something. In any case, Nikolai is extremely approachable. So like, I think if you just drop an email at any time, you have good chances for an answer. With no questions coming, I'm therefore closing the session. Thank you again for appearing and for the talk. I really enjoyed it. And the audience, next in a week, we are going to have a lecture by Professor Raimons Erštenis from Latvian University. And he will be speaking about the research of attitude of local communities towards waste management, behavioral patterns and implications for waste management plans and waste management policies in local community. This research is based on what they did in Latvia and Scotland, so it's pretty interesting comparative perspective. So thank you again, and see you on a week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.